The bioluminescent glow of the market faded behind them, reduced to a sickly, flickering pulse against the tunnel walls. Asha moved with a steady, rhythmic pace, her boots striking the concrete with a hollow resonance that seemed to travel forever into the dark. Marcus followed, his hand brushing the cold, weeping stone of the tunnel side, while Denise stayed close, her breathing shallow and jagged. They were moving away from the mapped sectors, away from the hum of the city above, and into a silence so absolute it felt like a physical weight. The air here was different. It tasted of metallic rot and stagnant water. Every step took them further from the familiar, stripping away the comfort of the industrial grid. Asha did not look back. She kept her eyes fixed on the deepening shadows ahead, where the electric lights had long since died. The tunnel began to narrow, the ceiling dipping lower, forcing them to hunch their shoulders. Marcus watched the light from his own handheld lamp struggle to penetrate the gloom. Behind them, the distant murmur of the market vanished, swallowed by the sheer mass of the earth. They were no longer in the city. They were beneath it, entering a space that had forgotten the sun. The rigid geometry of the subway tunnels began to fail. The sharp, right-angled corners of the utility conduits softened, melting into curves that defied engineering logic. Marcus ran his palm along the wall and recoiled. The stone was no longer cold, dead concrete. It felt porous, warm, and faintly damp, like the skin of a deep-sea creature. The walls were rippling. Where there had been rusted iron bolts and industrial cabling, there were now smooth, calcified ridges that spiraled upward into the dark. Denise stopped, her boots scraping against a floor that had lost its flat, level surface. The ground beneath them undulated in long, slow waves, as if the entire structure were breathing in sync with some hidden, subterranean rhythm. Asha paused, her silhouette framed by a tunnel that looked less like a passage and more like a throat. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something ancient, like turned earth. Every surface they touched seemed to yield under pressure, pulsing with a faint rhythmic vibration. The industrial world they knew had been completely overwritten by a visceral, organic architecture that felt entirely indifferent to their presence. They stood in the center of a corridor that was slowly, methodically reshaping itself around them. The tunnel terminated abruptly at a massive, monolithic archway that seemed to have been grown rather than built. It was carved directly into the bedrock, the stone polished to a dull, oily sheen. Marcus stepped forward, his lamp beam cutting through the gloom to illuminate the lintel. Two phrases were etched there: old depth and hungry dark. He stopped dead. The words did not just sit on the stone. They seemed to vibrate in his vision, pulling at his focus with a magnetic intensity. He reached out, his fingers trembling as he traced the sharp edges of the characters. A sudden, sharp spike of recognition flared behind his eyes. He knew these words. He did not know how, but the meaning hit him with the force of a physical blow, grounding his erratic pulse. Asha hung back, her hands tucked into her pockets, watching him with a detached, clinical intensity. Denise moved to his side, her breath hitching. The stone beneath his fingertips felt warm, and he felt the entire weight of the city above pressing down on the arch, waiting for the threshold to give way. Asha stepped into the light of the archway, her movements deliberate and slow. She did not look at the carvings, but at the darkness beyond them. "This is the border," she said, her voice barely rising above the low hum of the tunnel. "It predates the city, the people, and the very concept of a name." She pointed to the floor, where the stones seemed to shift under their weight. "It has been adjusting to the pressure of 8 million people for centuries. It is not evil, but it is waking up." Marcus braced his feet against the floor as a tremor rolled through the bedrock, rattling his teeth. The air pressure in the tunnel dropped sharply, popping his ears. Asha turned to face them, her eyes reflecting the dim light. "The ground above has been altered. The weight is shifting, and the thing beneath us is reacting to the change." Denise took a step back, her heel catching on a ridge of stone. She looked at the dark void beyond the arch, her breathing ragged. The floor groaned, a deep, grinding sound of tectonic plates settling. They were standing on the edge of a living, waking entity that was beginning to move. Marcus did not move. The name of the project hit him like a physical impact. Hudson Yards. 8 months ago, he had sat in a windowless office, staring at seismic data that refused to align with the city's blueprints. He had flagged the geological anomalies, the strange, rhythmic shifting of the bedrock beneath the new foundations. He had submitted the report through 3 different channels. Every single one had vanished. He remembered the silence from his superiors, the way his emails were marked as read but never acknowledged, the way his access to the project site was revoked without explanation. He had assumed it was incompetence, a simple case of bureaucratic negligence. Now, standing before the archway, the truth shifted into a terrifying focus. The anomalies were not errors. They were the first signs of the ground waking up. Someone had seen his data, recognized the threat, and buried it to keep the construction moving. He looked down at his hands, realizing they were shaking. The city was not just built on top of a secret. It was being forced into a new shape, and the people in charge knew exactly what they were disturbing. Marcus stared at the damp stone wall, his mind retracing the path of his report. It had not been lost in a digital void. It had been intercepted. He recalled the specific signature of the department head on the rejection notice, a man who had never stepped foot on a construction site. The bureaucracy was not a wall of indifference. It was a shield for the developers. He realized then that his warnings had been a threat to the timeline, an obstacle to the massive, profitable weight being pressed into the earth. The rhythm of the breathing from beyond the archway seemed to match the cold, mechanical efficiency of the corporate machine that had silenced him. He looked at Asha, then back at the dock, realizing that the danger was not just the creature beneath their feet, but the people above who were willing to risk a collapse for profit. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. The truth was no longer a theoretical geological concern. It was a physical weight pressing against his chest. He felt the cold air of the tunnel, the absolute lack of light, and the crushing realization that he was the only one who knew the foundation of the city was failing. He was no longer just an observer. He was a witness to a crime that spanned the entire skyline. Asha stepped closer to the archway, her voice barely carrying above the low hum of the tunnel. She gestured to the curved organic walls that seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic vibration. "This is the border," she said. "It predates the city, the people, and the very concept of a name." She traced the edge of the stone with her fingertips, feeling the slight tremors beneath the surface. "It has been adjusting to the weight of 8 million people for centuries. It is not evil," she continued, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the threshold. "But it is waking up because the ground above has been altered. The city is a lid, and every skyscraper is a weight, keeping the creature suppressed. But that weight is being shifted." She looked at Marcus, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "It does not hate us. It does not even know we are here. It is simply responding to the pressure." The architecture around them seemed to ripple, the walls shifting like skin over muscle. She stood back, letting the silence settle between them. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and damp earth, as the realization took hold that the city was not just built on land, but on a living, breathing foundation. Marcus stepped forward, his boots scraping against the uneven stone. He stared at the carved archway, his eyes tracing the words etched into the rock. "Old Debt" and "Hungry Dark." The letters were not merely cut into the surface. They seemed to be weeping, a dark, viscous moisture that pooled in the grooves. His skepticism, once a sturdy wall of professional detachment, crumbled. He reached out, his fingers hovering inches from the stone, and felt a static charge that made the hair on his arms stand up. The air around the archway rippled, distorting the light from their torches like heat rising from asphalt. He remembered the Hudson Yards development, the massive steel pilings he had flagged for geological anomalies 8 months ago. The report had been buried, dismissed as a clerical error. But here was the proof. The ground was not just shifting, it was reacting. The stone beneath his feet groaned, a low, grinding vibration that traveled up his legs and settled in his teeth. He looked at the archway again, and the shadows within it seemed to deepen, pulling at the light. His breath hitched. The environment was no longer passive. It was aware of them. He stood frozen, his hands still outstretched, as the reality of the situation locked into place. The city was not just heavy, it was intrusive, and the foundation was finally pushing back. The silence in the tunnel deepened, becoming a physical weight that pressed against their eardrums. Marcus held his breath, waiting for the echo of his own heartbeat to fade. But then, the air itself changed. A low, rhythmic vibration began to emanate from the void beyond the archway. It was not a mechanical hum or the distant rumble of the subway. It was pressurized, slow, and deliberate. The sound rolled forward, carrying the scent of deep-crust minerals and ancient stagnant water. It was the sound of a mountain exhaling. Denise took a sharp, jagged step backward, her boots scuffing the stone. But the sound did not stop. It deepened, vibrating through the marrow of their bones. Each exhalation lasted for seconds, a steady, massive output of air that stirred the dust at their feet. Asha did not move, her hands clenched at her sides, eyes fixed on the darkness. The rhythm was hypnotic and terrifying, suggesting a lung capacity that defied biological scale. Marcus tried to turn, to signal them to run, but his muscles refused to obey. The tunnel walls seemed to contract with every breath, the stone itself groaning in sympathy. Marcus stood anchored to the spot, his mind racing to reconcile the impossible. He looked at the darkness, and the data points from his past work began to align with terrifying precision. The seismic shifts he had flagged in the Hudson Yards project were not anomalies. They were the tremors of a shifting giant. He saw the city above as a fragile shell, a thin layer of concrete and glass resting precariously upon a living, breathing entity. His scientific training, which had served as his armor against the irrational, shattered under the weight of the evidence. There was no geological explanation for a mountain that breathed with such rhythmic, deliberate intent. He felt a cold, sharp clarity pierce through his confusion. The creature was real, it was immense, and it was currently reacting to the massive weight of the skyscrapers pressing down upon its back. He watched the dust motes dance in the air currents created by the entity's slow, heavy respiration. The skepticism that had defined his career evaporated, replaced by a singular, chilling realization. He was not looking at a geological phenomenon or a trick of the light. He was staring into the eyes of an ancient, waking force that the city had spent centuries trying to bury. The truth was no longer a theory to be debated. It was a physical presence, vast and undeniable, waiting in the dark. Asha pulled them away from the tunnel, moving through the labyrinthine maintenance corridors until the air grew dry and stale. They reached the archives, a subterranean vault lined with steel cabinets. Aisha cleared a heavy oak table and produced a leather-bound cylinder. She unrolled the parchment with agonizing care, pinning the corners down with heavy brass weights. The document was brittle, its edges frayed. Marcus leaned in, his eyes scanning the faded ochre pigments. It was a Lenape map, but not of the surface. Beneath the jagged outline of the hills, a figure was drawn in deep, charcoal strokes. It was curled, knees pulled to its chest. The figure was not a monster of myth, but a titan of earth and stone, its form perfectly mirroring the topography of the island above. Denise traced the lines with a trembling finger, her breath hitching. The pictograph provided a terrifying context for the tremors. It was a documented legacy, a sleeping giant that had been part of the island's geography long before the skyscrapers arrived. Marcus stared at the pictograph, his mind mapping the ancient strokes onto the modern grid of Manhattan. He saw the correlation with a sickening clarity. The skyscrapers were not mere monuments to progress or commerce. They were structural anchors, strategically placed to exert maximum downward force. Every foundation, every deep pile footing driven into the bedrock, was a pin holding the titan beneath the earth. The city was a lid, a massive, engineered cage. He imagined the immense weight of steel and concrete, millions of tons pressing down, generation after generation, suppressing the slow, rhythmic breathing. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The city was not built on the land. It was built to contain it. He looked at the map again, noting how the density of the skyscrapers aligned perfectly with the creature's spine and shoulders. The architecture was a containment protocol, a silent, centuries-long operation to keep the mountain from rising. But the ground was shifting. The lid was beginning to lose its grip. The city was not a home. It was a heavy, suffocating weight, and it was about to be thrown off. Marcus grabbed a drafting pencil, his hand shaking as he traced the new developments onto the ancient map. The Hudson Yards project was the fatal error. He had flagged the geological anomalies 8 months ago, noting the massive excavation work that was hollowing out the bedrock. At the time, he thought it was just bad engineering. Now, he saw the truth. The project had removed the weight from the creature's left shoulder, creating a localized pressure drop. The bedrock was buckling. He cross-referenced the site plans with the pictograph, and the alignment was perfect. The excavation was a puncture wound in the containment lid. The city was not just shifting, it was tearing itself apart from the inside out. He pointed to the site on the map, his finger pressing hard enough to tear the parchment. The ground was no longer holding the weight. It was reacting to the release. The rhythmic breathing he had heard in the dark was accelerating, becoming ragged and shallow. Every new floor added to the skyline elsewhere was now just a futile attempt to compensate. The catastrophe was not a future possibility. It was a mechanical process already underway. The pressure was equalizing, and the earth beneath Manhattan was preparing to heave. The heavy iron door groaned as Marcus pulled it shut, the sound echoing through the empty subway station like a gunshot. He threw the locking bolt, the metal biting into the frame with a finality that left his palms stinging. Asha and Denise stood back, their breathing ragged in the stagnant air of the platform. The tunnel behind them was silent now, but the silence felt pressurized, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Marcus leaned his forehead against the cold steel of the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could still feel the low-frequency vibration of the mountain exhaling, a tremor that seemed to linger in the soles of his boots. He looked at the clock on the wall. 3:02 a.m. The city above was sleeping, unaware that the foundation of their world had been compromised. Denise stared at the dark seam of the door, her fingers tracing the edge of her own jaw, while Aisha kept her gaze fixed on the tunnel entrance. Denise backed away from the iron door, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. She stopped near a support pillar, her hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them together to force them still. Her eyes darted toward the dark tunnel, then back to the sealed door, as if expecting the steel to buckle at any second. "We don't put this in the report," she whispered. "We don't tell anyone. We just walk away." She leaned her head against the cold tile, her breath hitching in ragged, shallow gasps. The isolation of the station felt absolute. She looked at Marcus, her face pale and drained of color, her eyes wide with a raw, unshielded terror. "If people know what is down there, they will come looking. They will tear the city apart to get to it." She reached out, gripping Marcus's arm with fingers that felt like ice. "Forget it, Marcus. Please." Marcus pulled his arm away, his jaw tightening until the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. He looked at the sealed door, then back at the empty, sterile platform. The terror Denise felt was real, but it was a luxury he could no longer afford. He thought of the Hudson Yards project, the geological anomalies he had flagged 8 months ago, and the way that report had simply vanished into the void of city bureaucracy. It had not been a mistake. It had been a choice. Someone in a high-rise office had seen his warnings, weighed the cost, and decided to bury the truth, to keep the construction moving. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, turning his fear into a sharp, cold anger. He paced the length of the platform, his boots striking the concrete with a rhythmic, aggressive cadence. He was not just fighting a creature beneath the earth. He was fighting a system that treated human lives as disposable variables. He stopped, staring at the dark tunnel entrance, his resolve hardening into something jagged and dangerous. He turned to Denise, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to say a word," he said, his voice steady. "But I have to figure out what to do. I am going to find them." Marcus stood in the dim, flickering light, the silence of the subway platform pressing against his ears. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen illuminating his face with a harsh blue glow. He checked his bank account. The balance was a hollow, insulting number, barely enough to cover the next week of rent. He stared at the digits. Above him, the city thrived, a sprawling machine of steel and glass that had never once offered him a hand. He thought of the thousands of people sleeping in the towers above, oblivious to the mountain exhaling beneath their feet. A bitter, jagged thought took root. Was this city worth saving? He looked at the sealed door, then up at the ceiling. The city was a lid, and he was just a speck of dust caught in the mechanism. He felt the pull of apathy. He was tired of being the only one who saw the truth. Tired of being the only one who cared about a world that refused to see him. The silence of the platform was absolute, a heavy shroud that seemed to amplify the rhythmic ticking of his own pulse. Marcus stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the dark, sealed threshold of the tunnel. He was still weighing the cost of his silence against the weight of his discovery when the air in his pocket hummed. A sharp, mechanical vibration cut through the stillness. He pulled the device out. The screen displayed 3 a.m. A number he did not recognize flashed beneath the time. He pressed the button and held the device to his ear. "Mr. Wade," a voice responded immediately. It was smooth, polished, and carried the practiced cadence of a corporate executive. "I am calling on behalf of the Voss Foundation." Marcus felt a cold prickle of awareness crawl up his spine. "We have an opportunity for you. You have a gift for finding things that others miss." Marcus looked at the sealed door one last time. The darkness behind it felt heavy, alive, and utterly indifferent to his struggle. He thought of his empty bank account, the crushing weight of his rent, and the faceless bureaucracy that had erased his report. The offer from the Voss Foundation was not just a job. It was an exit strategy. He tightened his grip on the phone, his knuckles turning white. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of the city above and the creature below. He exhaled, his jaw setting into a hard, final line. "What kind of consulting?" he asked. His voice was steady, stripped of the fear that had defined his night. The platform returned to silence, leaving the city to sleep on its restless, shifting foundation.